Hi, this is Fred Feniger. I am taping Sid Tuchman.
Yes.
Today is September 2, 2007, and we are in his house. Sid, where do you live?
I live at 9514 Cedar Springs Drive. Is the sound level okay?
Sound level can be adjusted.
And I live here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I also live in San Francisco. Now, why do I live in San Francisco? My wife and I are the proud parents of 3 children. Mitchell, let's see, who else? See, I get on this thing and I get nervous, I forget names. Mitchell and Kathy and Ellen. And Mitchell, when he got out of Harvard Business School, he had a job in San Francisco with Atari. And after he was there for about 3 months, he decided that he would never ever come back to Indianapolis, and therefore we would all have to go out there. So we all went out to San Francisco. One by one, Ellen got out of school. She was in, where was she in? Indiana University, then got a job in St. Louis. And he said, you don't know anybody in St. Louis, you have to come out here with me. Poor lonesome Mitchell. And she did. Kathy got out of IU, got a job with Young and Rubicam, big advertising agency. And they ganged up on her and they said, you cannot live in New York. It is a dangerous place. You have to come out here with us. As a matter of fact, we were out with Kathy in New York, Charlene and I, and we were walking down 42nd Street. Somebody came up to us and wanted to know if I wanted to buy any dope. Do I look like somebody who would want to buy dope? So we said, Kathy, you got to get out of here. So anyway, she moved out there, and then they all got married, and they all started having babies. And so we decided to move out there too. So in answer to your question, we live here, and then we also live at 25 Heather Avenue in San Francisco.
And what is the oldest memory you've got?
The oldest
memory? What can you remember about your youth? How far back can you remember?
I remember my father had come over from the old country, of course, and I want to go back there and tell you how we happened to come to the United States. But my oldest memory is we moved from the South Side. My father was making it. He had a store of his own, and he had a little tailor shop, and he was doing okay, and he finally was able to realize the great American dream, and he bought a house. This was in about let's see, if I was 3 years old, I was born in 24. 1927. In 1927, he bought a house at 2961 North Delaware. It was a double house. And we went up there in an old Model T, and that means all of us. That means my brothers Joe and Fred, and my sisters Rose and Sarah. So we were all piled in this old Model T with everything we could carry. And the only problem is my father forgot the key. So my oldest memory, I guess, is climbing in. There was a window open, and so I was able to climb in, and I let all of my family into our brand new house at 2961 North Delaware. That's my oldest memory. You want to know how we happened to come to America?
Yes, I do.
Do you? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you. My parents were born in a city called Lublin, Poland, and this is within the Pale. You know what the Pale is? The Pale was an area that circumscribed a certain area in which all Jews had to stay and were not allowed to get out. That was the Pale. You were Jewish, you lived in Poland, which was, or even Russia. I think this also encompassed part of Russia. It was terrible anti-Semitic countries. And you couldn't get out. Even, in fact, Charlene and I were just not too many years ago at the Jewish Museum in New York. And it was an exhibit of, oh God, what's the famous Jewish, it's right on the tip of my tongue. I can remember, the oldest memory you told me, I can't remember what happened yesterday. God, anyway, this famous artist had to get permission to get out of the Pale to do an art gallery opening in the Louvre in Paris. So anyway, it was terrible. So where was I? What was I talking about? Oh, they lived in the Pale. It was a Russian-dominated country, and it was awful. My uncle, who at the time was about 16 years old, that was my mother's brother, Jake Friedman, was a firebrand, and he was a dedicated Bolshevik. The Bolsheviks' stated conviction was they're going to overthrow the government. So my uncle saw a Cossack on horseback beating almost to death a Jewish friend of his. My uncle is 16 years old, just a little guy, he's just a little fellow, but he was a firebrand, stocky guy, takes out a gun and he kills this Cossack. That is not a healthy thing to do for a Jew. Maybe for somebody else, but for a Jew, this is not a healthy thing to do. But the Jewish Federation came to his rescue, as they did with many people, and they smuggled him across Europe to London or somewhere, it wouldn't be London, but somewhere in England and across the country, and he ended up in Indianapolis, Indiana. Why would they smuggle a Jew to Indianapolis, Indiana? Well, everybody in our family knew how to sew. They were apprenticed out at a very young age, and my father was an expert tailor. My uncle was an expert tailor. Even my mother was apprenticed out when she was 8 years old. 8 years old, she was apprenticed out to become a seamstress. And as an aside, because she hated what she had to do, because of the money that was raised and so forth, she hated it so much she wouldn't allow her daughters, Rose and Sarah, to ever pick up a needle. They could never sew. Something needed to have a seam sewed, I'll do it. As a matter of fact, we were very poor when the girls were going to college. None of us. My brother was the only one who went to college.
Now, what's his name?
My brother, that was Joe. Joe was the only one who went to college. He was the only one who really knew what he wanted to do. Joe always, from an early age, wanted to be a doctor. That's because he was such a tzakruchana. This kid was always sick. He had everything, every bone in his body was broken. He'd go swimming. I remember he got in a fight with Marvin Farber in the swimming pool, and he hit him as hard as he could, and he broke his wrist. Nothing was wrong with Farber. My brother had a broken wrist. Broken wrist, he climbed a rope, he would fall down, he'd break a leg. He was really a very sickly kind of a guy, but he was a very wonderful guy, and he was a brilliant doctor. So everybody pitched in. Well, I was too young. But my father, of course, sent some money. And there was a quota at Indiana University in order to get in to be a doctor. So Rose contributed, Sarah contributed, Fred contributed, everybody contributed. But anyway, if my sisters wanted to go someplace, they were always the best dressed girls at wherever they went. And why were they very best dressed? Because they couldn't afford to buy a dress. But my mother would send them downtown. She'd go downtown with them to places like Blocks or Ayers, Watson's, Rinks, one of the famous department stores of my youth that don't exist anymore. They're all bought out. And she would say, pick out a dress. They would pick out a dress. They try it on. They put on a dress. Did you know this? They put on a dress, and they would say, I like this dress. And Rose would say, oh, this is my dress. Sarah would say, oh, this is a dress I love. And she would go into I guess it's called dry goods department, and buy the material. The girls would go to sleep. And when they woke up the next morning, they had the first try on. And that's how they were always so well dressed.
Now, who were your mother's name was?
My mother's name was Pearl.
And your father's name?
Was Sam.
And who are your brothers and sisters again?
My brother is Joe the doctor. They never say Fred the presser or Sid the driver. No, it was Joe the doctor. Joe the doctor. Us, we were non-entities because we were not professionals. If you were Jewish, you had to be a doctor. Second class, maybe an engineer. First class, probably a lawyer. A lawyer. You had to have initials after your name.
And then your sisters were?
Rose and Sarah. So, my uncle came to Indianapolis. And why Indianapolis? Because Indianapolis was the home of a factory called the Kahn Tailoring Company. The Kahn Tailoring Company made ready-to-wear clothes, and it was one of the first of its kind in America. Usually, if you wanted to have a suit, you had to go to a tailor, somebody like my father, and my father would make you a suit of clothes. But here was this latest innovation, and you could go to a store and pick a suit right up off the rack. And my father made those suits at Kahn Tailoring Company. Now, it's interesting to know that my father could read a little bit. No, he couldn't read at all. What am I talking about? He could speak English, but he couldn't read or write at all. He could maybe pick out a couple of words. But as a matter of fact, what's so awful about that horrible country called Poland is that they couldn't even speak Polish. They came to America in their youth. My dad, after my uncle came here, 1 year later he brought over my father. And my father at the time, this was in 1912, was about maybe 19 years old. He left behind his wife, my mother, Pearl, little Perla, he called her little Perla, who was pregnant with Rose. Charlene, that's your mother. She was pregnant. So anyway, the Kahn Tailoring Company would hire every immigrant that they could get their hands on that knew how to sew, because it was a new concept and the clothes were just flying off the racks. Okay, so my uncle went to work. He made enough money to bring his sister, Pearl, my mother, who was pregnant with Rose. No, what am I talking about? First he had to bring over my father. So my father came over in steerage. Steerage must be the belly of the ship. People were throwing up all over everybody. It must have been a terrible situation, and there was not much sanitation. And he got off of that ship, and he said, when I bring my wife over, she will never go into steerage. She will have a good seat on the ship. And he did. About a year later, he was able to make enough money, and my mother came over. Now, my mother is a very quiet woman. I'll cry.
And cute.
Will you stop that damn thing for a minute? All right, I'm okay now.
Was she older? Who was older, your father or your
My mother
mother?
was older than I.
No, who was older, your dad or your mom?
They were the same age.
Okay. And how
Almost completely the same age.
How
I was
it-
crazy about my mother.
how had they met, do you know?
Probably fixed up. Yeah, they were probably fixed up. There's no such thing as dating.
Yeah.
They got fixed up and they got married. My dad was absolutely wild about my mother. My father was could be a little crude. I think I take after him. And my mother was a very, very gentle woman. And whenever he would swear or, oh, Sam, do you have to do that? She was a very gentle woman. Totally uneducated. Couldn't read, couldn't write, neither one of them. So my father made enough money for her to come over. And the reason, I'm going to do it again, Charlene and I.
So she came over after about a year?
Yeah.
And
Because Rose, that's your mother, that's your mother-in-law.
Right.
Rose was 9 months old when they came over to this country. And she was pregnant when my father left. So it's a year later. That's not heavy mathematics. I can figure that out.
Did they come over with anybody else in a
Yes.
group?
My mother brought her mother, who was a very sickly, asthmatic woman. In fact, I think she died when she was about 35 years old. I never knew my grandmother. I never knew my mother's mother. So anyway, we went to Ellis Island once in New York.
Is that where both your father and your mother arrived?
Yeah, they arrived. And I saw this huge place. And I saw my little mother. Oh, darn.
But how did she get from Ellis Island to Indianapolis?
Well, they didn't walk. I guess they had a train or they had something. They had a train. But she she had to have a baby in her arms. She's a little woman, and she's weak. My mother's not strong, tiny. She had a baby in her arms. Huh?
She couldn't drop her as my mom.
That's right. It was your mother. She couldn't drop her. And an asthmatic mother on her hand. Can't read a sign. I don't know how the hell she knew where she had to go, but she got there. She's smart. She was a smart woman. So he vowed that she would never go on steerage, and she didn't. I don't imagine he bought her a first-class ticket, but she bought her a ticket where they were comfortable coming over to America. So he's working at the Con Tailoring Company, and then one of these days he tried to actualize the American dream, and he said, I'm going into business for myself. Why should I work 9 hours a day for a Con Tailoring Company when I can work 20 hours a day for myself? And he did, and he got a little shop at somewhere, I don't remember. It was 22nd, 23rd, and Illinois Street. And they had this little tailor shop down below that I'm not familiar with, and they lived above. And I wasn't born at that time. And then they did a little bit better, and they decided to move to 705 Fairfield Avenue. And that's the first place I remember my dad working. Crummy little 20, maybe 15 feet wide, 15 feet long. What would that be? 225 square feet. And there was a counter for customers to bring in cleaning, which they would send to a wholesaler. The clothes would come back. He would press them. And he would sew them. Hot as hell. Terrible place. And he also had bought this house not too far from there at 2961 Delaware Street that I alluded to a little while ago. And we lived around the corner, and every time I would walk home from school we had lost our house at 2961, that's right, the Depression came. The Depression came and we lost the tenant, he lost his job when there was not enough money from the double to come in, they lost the house. And so we had to move to other places. So one of the houses we lived in was 3525, and I remember my father, when he'd see me come home from school, he'd knock on the door, knock on the window, come here. So I'd go in, I knew what I was in for. Make some hangers, which means you had to take a hanger and a guard and put them together, brush some cuffs. You have no idea what a horrible job that is for a kid who's probably 9 or 10 or 11 years old. You had to take, well, I don't have cuffs on here, you had to pull this down and you had to brush this. I constantly had raw knuckles here from brushing these cuffs. Many, many years later, and as we grew, and at one time we had, by the time I sold the business, we had 35 stores. One of our supervisors came up and he said, "Sir, why are we brushing cuffs?" So I said, well, that's what we do. You know, like a locust stings people and surgeons operate on people. We brush cuffs. Well, I don't think the customers realize that. I said, well, how do you know that? She says, well, I don't, but I'd like to test it. How would you like to test it? Well, let me take 10 stores and stop brushing cuffs. Okay, fine. So she did that. She says, we haven't had one complaint. So from that point on, we never brushed a cuff. My father then, I'm going forward many years, and my father, who didn't really know a lot about the business, he was the best tailor in Indianapolis, but didn't really know a lot about business as such, business policies, best practices and so forth, calls me up one night and he says, you know, you're going to lose your business? I get one of those calls about every other day. Dad, why am I going to lose my business? Well, you don't even brush cuffs anymore. I said, you're kidding. I said, no, we don't do that anymore. And he says, well, you're going to lose your business. I said, would you like to know something? We haven't brushed cuffs for the last 15 years, and you just noticed it. So those were the kind of things that I went into all the time. Oh, you're going to lose your business. What's the matter? Well, there's a spot on a garment. How many garments do you look at? How many do I have to look at? I looked at one. That's enough. Well, that's really not enough to determine that our quality is bad. Our quality was very good. All right, so where am I? We're trying to do this chronologically.
Well, how did Tuchman Cleaners? It started out with one. He started out with one store. Was he more? And he was a tailor, but he didn't do any of his own cleaning. How did you begin to do your own cleaning?
Well, the Depression came. We lost our house. My sisters worked, they had to contribute to the household.
What year?
29,
well,
1929.
the Depression was from 32, let's say this went all the way up from 32 to 41. Let's take that era. And my brother went to work for my father.
This is
And
Fred.
then, yeah, this is Fred. And then there was an innovation that happened in the cleaning business. In the cleaning business, you had to send your work out to somebody who had the facility to clean in a fireproof building because the solvent was flammable. And as long as it was flammable, you had to be in a special kind of a building and you couldn't do it in a storeroom. Well, then there was an innovation, came up with some new solvent called carbon tetrachloride. Poison. But anyway, that was the cleaning solvent, and there was a new machine, and we decided to buy my family decided to buy the machine. Couldn't do it in this little 15 or 200 and 300 square foot building. We moved across the place to a cavernous place. Building was a storefront. It was 20 feet by 60 feet long. 1,200 square feet, and we put the cleaning machine in the back. And Fred did the cleaning, and my father did the sewing, and we had a guy that picked up and delivered clothes. Well, the war came, World War II, Pearl Harbor, and Fred was drafted into the Army. My father, now we had worked up a little bit of a business, it was supporting a family of 5 children. And when he was drafted into the Army, my father, who didn't know how to read or write, needed somebody in the family to run into the business. Well, I was 16 and a half, and so I studied real hard, and I graduated Shortridge at 16 and a half. And then I took over the business. And I ran it until I was drafted in 1943, and when I went into the Army, then your mother took over. Rose took over the business.
Now, how many stores was there? Just one?
Well, it was one store.
One store.
One store and one truck. One store and one
Where
truck.
was it?
That was at 3514 College. 3514 College Avenue. Right next door was a wonderful little neighborhood department store called Nick Kerr's. It's all gone. They're all those buildings are torn down now.
Were there a lot of competitors back then in the business with a lot of other cleaners?
Well, yes. Progress Laundry was probably the biggest one. They probably had 80 stores, no, 80 routes. At one time they had 80 routes and probably 50 stores. Davis Cleaners moved right next door to us. We were charging 85 cents for a suit. They were charging 59 cents. And I thought, oh my God, we're going to go broke. What the hell are we going to do with this kind of a competitor? But their work was so lousy that we never lost any business. In fact, we grew because they brought business to the corner. So Rose took over the business. So what happened after that? So now we all came home from the Army, and we're going to build a big dry cleaning business. I had no idea what to do with my life. My brother didn't know what the hell to do with his life. Rose, your mother, who had taken over the store, she only knew one thing: get out of the cleaning business. She had to leave that. She hated that. It was not. She's used to being a secretary. She took. Incidentally, one of the things my mother did was to make sure, she didn't know about sending kids to college, but she did know about seeing that they had a career. And both Rose and Sarah went to stenographic school. I guess that's what it was called. They learned how to do shorthand. It's not like they do today, but they did shorthand. And they always were able to get a good job. Even during the Depression, they were able to get it. Even your Aunt Sarah, she had a good job. All her money went to clothes. Rose, I think, saved a little bit and gave some to Joe to go to college. But Sarah, she had to have clothes. She was a very fashionable woman. Both my sisters were fashionable.
Tell about the swaddling cloth in the old country.
Swaddling cloth?
That your mother.
Oh, yeah, right. My mother was.
It says something about your mother.
Yeah, she was contrary. Apparently, in Europe, when a child is born, and you'll have to help me out here. That's my wife over there who's doing that. Very pretty woman sitting over there. We've been happily married for 47 years to this date, which is not bad out of 53. We've been married a total of 53. No, I think we were all happy for all. So my mother was told to wrap Rose in the swaddling cloth. Now, why do I think there was something about Jesus with this swaddling cloth? Do you know anything about that?
Nothing had to do with
Well,
Jesus.
anyway, you wrap kids into swaddling cloth.
Keep them away from evil spirits.
Okay, is that was it?
I think so.
Oh, my wife says that's to keep the child from receiving evil spirits. Well, apparently Rose didn't like it, and she cried and cried and cried. And so my mother said, to hell with it, I'm going to take them off. So she took off the swaddling cloth, and everybody said, evil is going to come to your daughter. But evil never came. Look, she's blessed with this wonderful daughter, wonderful brothers, nice sister. Anyway, no, Rose had a very nice wife. So now I'm all off track. Where am I?
Well, you were talking about the business, and
Yes.
we'd gone through. Rose ran it for how long did she run it then?
Well, I was in the Army from March of 43 till March of 46. That's 3 years.
And
She ran it for 3
when
years.
you were in the Army, what did you do?
That's another interesting story. I was in the infantry. I didn't do well in the infantry. These were, anybody who was smart all of my friends, my contemporaries that went to high school with, they all had a year or two of college. I didn't have that, so I went into the infantry. It's bad. I mean, I had bayonet training. You know what you do with bayonet? You got a thing, a sword on the end of your gun, and then you stab people. Well, I had this training. I thought, I can't do that. I mean, I don't know. Somebody came after me with one of those. Oh, I'm not a very brave person. So I figured I got to get out of this infantry. And they had a program called the Army Specialized Training Program, where you could take a test, and if you passed, you would become an engineer. You would go to engineering school, or you would go to a language school. Well, I passed, and I got into a school, an engineering school. As a matter of fact, I went to Rose Polytechnic Institute in Terre Haute, Indiana, 70 miles from Indianapolis. So for 9 glorious months, I was able to come home every weekend. But I had a problem. I had almost straight A's in high school, except for 1 C, and that was in geometry. I was terrible in mathematics. And I went up to my professor. Probably shouldn't have done this, but it was important. I had to pass. I had to get good grades. I had no idea what physics was like. So I went up to this physics teacher, and I can't remember his name, but I said, sir, I have never had physics before. I don't know anything about math. But if you would help me and give me a little coaching, I will be among your best students. But, I know you got a lot of people here that you got to work with if you don't have time. I said, if you don't have time to do that, it's okay. And if I flunk out, and if you ever keep track of me, I might get killed. I probably would get killed in the Army. And I wouldn't want you to feel guilty about that. But if you give me some time, I would do all right. So he did. I got straight A's. Straight A's in physics. I hated that course, can't tell you. But I hated going back to the infantry worse. So I did okay. So we got out of the Army. I got out of the Army. And Fred and I decided we were going to build a dry cleaning empire.
Now, in the Army, what was Fred doing?
Oh, wait a minute. I got to tell you.
Okay.
When I was at Rose Poly,
Right.
the Battle of the Bulge was taking place, and Germany cracked. There was a battle in wherever that was, and they had to close down all of the schools where people were not necessary. They needed people to fight the war. And now I'm up again. I could land up in the infantry again. Well, I had in my possession, I knew every school that the Army had. Everything. I could have chosen West Point. I could have chosen anything. West Point was the last because you got to sign up for 6 years. But I would have done that rather than go to the infantry. So I signed up for the Signal Corps, and I learned how to code and decode messages. Every message that was wired around the country, was coded, and somebody had to decode it. And I learned how to do that. So we ended up in a staging area in Oahu. And I noticed that everybody in Oahu was, all of my contemporaries that I was in school with, and that I was in Signal Corps school with, they're all being sent away. Some are going to Iwo Jima, some were going to the Marianas, some were going to Okinawa, and I'm still staying there. And I don't feel bad about not going down to Iwo Jima, but why me? And I found out the thing that always embarrassed me saved my life, could have saved my life. My mother was not a citizen of the United States. Why wasn't she a citizen? She couldn't read or write. And you had to fill out papers, and she didn't know how to do that. As a matter of fact, she seldom came to school, as much as she would like to have come to school, and as much as I would have liked for her to have come to school, because you had to sign in. So I taught her how to write her name so she could come and see me in a play or whatever it might have been. She came, and I could see her write her name, and she was a nervous wreck, and I would never ask her to do that again. It was just terrible. She was just, shy. So the FBI would not give me clearance because my mother wasn't a citizen. By the time they finally found out that this sweet little darling woman was not a threat to the United States, then I got clearance. And by that time, I was made manager of the signal, this signal corps in Oahu, and they wouldn't send me down because I was valuable. So, as a matter of fact, I have, and I gave to my son-in-law, John Rothman, when MacArthur dictated all of the rules of the defeat for Hirohito and how they had to meet on the ship, and it was the most involved bureaucratic thing you ever read in your whole life, but interesting. I saved one of the copies of that message and printed it up. So now I'm out of the Army, right?
And did you get out at the same time as Fred?
No, he got out first.
And
within months. It was just within months.
What had he been doing?
He was an officer. He was a big shot. He went to officers training school, and he became a second lieutenant. I think he became a first lieutenant. But he did very well, and he came down to visit me when I was in the infantry in Camp Robinson, Arkansas. Terrible place, terrible. He came down with his wife, Lillian, and she was beautiful. She was svelte and beautiful. I remember she had this wonderful hat on, and everybody looked and, oh my God, what's Tuchman got there? What's he doing with that officer? That's his brother. Wow. I had, maybe 5 minutes of fame at that time in the infantry. It was
So where had your brother been stationed?
He was in Camp Oglethorpe in Georgia. And somehow or other, that's where he met Lillian, and they got married while they were in the Army. He got married while he was in the Army. Sarah got married while met a blind date from a doctor that was stationed at Camp Atterbury in Indiana, and they met. They fell in love. They got married, and then he went overseas.
Now, did Fred go overseas?
No, Fred never went overseas. I think Harry went overseas. I think. Charlene has 2 aunts. Both of them were WACs, and they were, yes, I know Harry was overseas, because Harry Lieberman, that was Sarah's husband, was stationed in Africa, and if you remember before, the Normandy beachhead, the attack on Normandy, got a frog in my throat, of all things to happen. He was in the Anzio beachhead that attacked. It was a feint to draw attention away from Normandy. So he left from Africa to go to the Anzio beachhead in the boot part of Italy. And alongside in there, and I don't know if he ever met him or not, were Charlene's 2 aunts who were nurses. And they fought at the Anzio beachhead. You know that? Rose Nelson?
No, but my dad was there.
Huh?
My dad was at Nancy.
Right, Ed Malossi got shot.
Did they ever get together there?
Ed Malossi got shot 3 times on Anzio Beach.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, how do you like that? Well, so Fred and I were working, and I took over the routes, and I built up 2 or 3 routes, and Fred was cleaning and pressing clothes. No, we had pressers at that time, and we were starting to grow. But somehow or other, they didn't want to do what I wanted to have done. So I said, I am leaving. I am going to Hollywood and become a star. And my father was having a fit because he didn't want to go. And my mother, who was always my greatest ally, said, he has to do what he has to do, let him go. Who said that? Let my people go. Who said that? Isn't that a famous song? Moses. So I went to Hollywood. I was accepted at the Pasadena Playhouse. I worked there a little bit, but then I took another school. Anyway, I was taking ballet lessons and singing lessons and dancing lessons and all kinds of things. And people said, well, you know, it's going to take years. I said, it's not going to take years. I'll get a screen test. So I looked in the phone book to find out who the talent agent, you know, oh no, I know. I called up MGM. So I called up MGM, I want to talk to the talent scout. And I talked to the talent scout and I said, well, I'm from Indianapolis and I've been in a lot of things and I would like for you to interview me. The guy says, we're only looking for leading men. Well, at the time I was 21, I looked like I was 12. I said, I'm a leading man. So he says, okay, come on down. So I come down. He says, what have you ever been in? Any show that I had ever been in. I was in a lot of amateur shows. Anything I had ever been in, I was the star. I was the star of everything. And he says, oh, you play the leads and all that? Yeah. In professional? Yes, professional. He says, so you are a professional actor? I said, yes. He says, let me see your I think it was called ASCAP, American Screen. Is that what it is? Yeah, let me see your ASCAP card. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. So I said, well, I don't know what that is. And he says, you know, you're bullshitting me, right? And I said, well, I've been in a lot of shows. He says, you're new out here. You get into some plays, we'll see you. And if you're any good, we'll call you back in on our terms. Okay. Well, in order to pay for all of this, because I couldn't get any help from my parents, you know, they were just keeping their head above water, I went to work at a shoe store. And at this shoe store, every day I would meet somebody that I thought was from Indianapolis. I said, did I go to school with you? He said, no, you probably saw me last night. Did you see the Eddie Cantor story? Yes, well, I have the lead in the Eddie Cantor story. What are you doing here? He says, well, I'm in between shows. And that's when I learned that every time you had a job and that movie was over with, you are out of work. Now, I'm a little paranoid, and the thought of being out of work every time I did any kind of a role would drive me crazy. And all these extras, that are not extras, people that were featured players, they would end up being in the line with me. And so I thought, well, one of these days, after a year of doing all this, one of these days I'm going to be 50 years old, and if I still have to be in one of these lines in between shows, I couldn't do that. So I talked to Fred and I talked to my father, and I said, now if you want to continue the business along the business plan that I've developed, now when I tell you a business plan, this is not a business plan that's professionally done. It was my business plan. It was a plan that said, well, if I add another route, or if I add another store, if I do this, we could become wealthy. So they said, okay. And so we got together and everything worked out just fine, and we started growing, and business was very good. So where does that bring us now?
Well, that was about when the business started growing. About when was that?
Well, we moved into our big plant in 1953.
Now that's on Keystone Avenue?
That's the one on Keystone Avenue. We hawked our soul. My uncle Morris, also another immigrant from the old country, told me, he says, when you get paid at the end of the week, what do you do with your money? So I said, well, you know, I bought a car, I got a payment on the car, and I like to buy clothes. I'd buy some clothes, and I'd have a date and so forth. And he says, when do you get paid? And I said, well, if there's anything left, I guess I get paid. He says, starting now, you're going to change that. You get paid first. You take $25, $50 a week, and you put it under your mattress. You do anything you want to it, but you put that money in the bank. Or you put so much money in the bank. And I did. And then he says, and start establishing credit. What are you talking about? Well, one of these days, you're going to want to buy a plant, or you're going to want to grow. So you need to establish some credit. So I put some money in the bank, and they saw that I had a bank account. And so I went to the bank, Indiana National Bank. I want to borrow $500. What do you want it for? So I didn't want it for anything. I just wanted to build this thing up so I could get some credit. And I said, I don't know. He said, well, you mean working capital? I said, what's that? Well, you need some money in the business? That's it. I need working capital. Let me have some working capital. So I got it up to about $5,000. And that's when we saw this place. We said, we've got to get out of this 1,200 square foot place, and we need a plant. Because I know I can add as many routes and as many stores as I want to, and we're good. And we established a brand, and I didn't even know what the terminology establish a brand was, but whatever it was, we were doing well, and we were eating into our competition.
And this was Tuchman Cleaners.
This is Tuchman Cleaners.
Had it always had that name?
No, it used to be Tuchman Cleaners, and then it was Tuchman and Son. That was Fred. And then it was Tuchman and Sons. And then I thought that was just too cumbersome, and we changed it back to Tuchman Cleaners. Okay? So we couldn't get enough money. So then I went to the bank, and I said, there's a piece of property at 44th and Allisonville Road. Keystone was just a dirt street at that time. And I want to buy some property. Oh, that's a capital investment. Well, whatever it is, that's what I want to do. Well, we can't give you any money for that. Only for working capital, that's all. Well, excuse me, I borrowed money from wherever we could borrow. And who do we borrow money from? I got some money from Joe. Joe would lend me some money. And I got money from Joe's father-in-law, that was Murray Satz, and we bought that property. Now we're building the building, and we couldn't get any financing for that. Somehow or other, Lux Laundry, which was a large laundry here in town, had a fire. And they had about 20, 30 trucks. So Fred went over there and said, look, if you need any help in cleaning and pressing clothes, we'll be glad to help you. So he sent it over, and then he said, I hear you're building a building. Why don't you let me build it for you, and you'll rent it for me. You can buy it for me. I'll hold the mortgage. Couldn't believe it. So we did that. Now we've got the land. We're building a building. We have no equipment. We have no equipment. So I go to the bank and I say, I need $10,000. Wouldn't lend me $10,000. So then we went to the Merchants National Bank. And I went in. What do you want this for? I want it for equipment. We're building this building, and I got to have some money. Well, we have to take it up to the loan committee. Things like this don't happen anymore. So this was the executive vice president. The president of the company was Otto Frenzel, Merchants National Bank. So I come back, and the building's almost done, and we're ready to move in, and we haven't got any pressing machines. We don't have any cleaning machines. It was terrible. I got to have $10,000. He says, well, we're taking it up with the committee. I said, who's the committee? He says, well, the committee's really Mr. Frenzel. Well, let's go talk to Mr. Frenzel right now. I got to have some money. So he says, okay. So he takes me into the president's office, and I am awe-stricken, but I'm trying to be very cool, very cool. So, Mr. Frenzel, how do you do? Very glad to know you. We're starting this cleaning business. We're really making an impact into the market. We're starting to get a brand name. We're doing this and we're doing that. And finally, Otto says, okay, I can't remember the other guy's name. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, what do you think? Well, I think he's very good. I think we ought to lend it to him. You think so? Yeah, okay, do it. And I looked at both of them and I said, is this how the loan committee works? I should have only known this ages ago. So anyway, that's how it went. And we went from hand to mouth for years. As soon as we had a couple of bucks, buy another cleaning machine, another pressing machine, another truck. Let's build out another store. Interesting story about Mel Simon. You know who Mel Simon is. Mel Simon is a local guy. No, he's a guy from New York. Very gifted man. I understand he went to a school there that's only for gifted people. And he's a rough, tough guy, but he's got a heart of gold. He was working for a local real estate guy. And he called me up and he says, I got a storeroom up at 71st and Michigan Road, Westfield. And I said, okay, and went over and looked at it, and it looked good. Well, I'm nervous when it came to making all these investments, because all we had to do is make one mistake and everything we have would just go to hell. So he comes over and he sees me, and I said, Mel, I got to think about it. This is Mel Simon, who today, is the head of Simon Properties. He's a billionaire. He's listed in the Forbes list of billionaires. Built a gigantic, but he was tough. And finally one day when I came out there, and he says, I'm tired of talking to you. Now I'm telling you right now, sign it. Here, sign it. It's a great store. It's a wonderful store. This is a great location. I've done all the demographics. You don't have time to do it. You don't understand. Sign it now. You sure, Mel? Yeah, sign it now. God, I could go broke if it. Sign it. Okay. And I signed it. That's how we operated. Now, people will say Mel is rough and he's gruff. It's only because he's got so much money. It's always been that way. He's always had a heart of gold. As a matter of fact, we invested, Ronnie Newmark, Alvin Cohen, a bunch of guys, invested in one of his early shopping centers. Ours that we invested in was the only one that went broke. It's the only one that didn't make it. But Mel Simon gave us all our money back, all the money we invested. I mean, that guy was a general. So anyway, we grew and grew. Business was good. We faced all kinds of traumas. What about our children? God, we had wonderful kids. We had 3 children. Do we want to talk about that?
Let's talk about, let's go just a little bit further with the business. It was finally got sold. How did that take place?
How did that take place? Well, the business, as all businesses, faced many changes. I'm building up routes. That was a piece of cake for me. As soon as we built up one route, I would find a routeman. They would, take over, and then I would start another route and another route. And then the shopping centers started coming into being. And the shopping centers killed the route business. So, okay, what am I going to do now? Well, I guess we better start going into the store business. So we started going into a bunch of stores. And then there was another innovation in the dry cleaning business, and you could put plants in very small areas, and instead of what's known as a dry store, where we did all of the work at our big plant on Keystone, we were faced with the competition of people putting in plants. So I figured, well, we better do that too, because if they opened a plant next to one of our dry stores, it would hurt us. So we started doing that. And then polyesters came. And in any event, there were things that just happened all the time. But when polyesters came, we had to go into something other than dry cleaning. We went into the uniform rental business. And that was a tough business. And it's a mafia-dominated type business. And the people who had existing uniform rental companies like Mechanics Laundry here in town, they felt they owned the market, and they called the manufacturers and said, you sell any of the good clothes to Tuchman Cleaners, we'll quit you. So we couldn't buy any good clothes. So we found somebody in Cincinnati, a guy by the name of Dick Farmer, who was very nice to us, and he showed us how to get around all that. And we started growing and growing, and we decided that if we were really going to get big and get some of these manufacturers to give us a decent price, we were going to have to franchise. So we knew dry cleaners, a fellow by the name of Bill Pulley, who had a chain in Ohio with 115 units, and I started a franchise company with an engineer, and we sold dry cleaning franchises to dry cleaners all over the country. I think we had, by the time we sold that, we had 350 licensees. And we taught them how to get into the uniform rental business. And one of our licensees was a company in England called the Johnson Group that had about 2,000 stores. And they wanted to get out of the store business into the uniform rental company, and so they bought our franchise. And then they decided that they wanted to come into the United States, and I was the first one they bought. and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I mean, they not only wanted our company as a stepping stone. We had 35 stores. We had a uniform rental company. We had a eight route company. So from that, we learned about the British, and they liked what they saw in my company, and they knew I could help them buy other stores. So I sold to them many, many years ago. Let me tell you about Charlene. No, I did that in 1982. I was one of the older bachelors in Indianapolis. And I'm trying to think of, I didn't write any of this down, so I'm doing this, I don't know if I'm missing anything. You still got film in this thing? Okay. So I had a blind date with a customer. There was a customer of ours called Ruby Shockett. And Ruby had a niece called Selma Bond, who was the sister of the woman that was going to become my wife. So they fixed me up on one Saturday night, and Selma said, you'll come to our house for dinner, and we went to another nightclub. It was a terrible nightclub. And we went there, and I thought, this is a very nice woman. And then we had another date on Tuesday night. We had another date on Thursday night. And on Saturday night, I guess you don't touch Jewish girls. You don't do that. You know that? You don't do that. I mean, if you want to play around, why, you go outside the Jewish community. Although I'm sure there were Jewish girls that I didn't know about that did it. But most of the ones I know never did anything. So every time I touched Charlene, she didn't like that. So on Saturday night, she says to me, I don't want to see you anymore. Well, I'm falling in love with this girl. And I said, what do you want to see me anymore? What do you mean you don't want to see me? She says, well, I'll marry you. I can't stand you. Whatever it is that you're doing here, I don't like it. And I'm not going to do anything until I get married. And I just can't stand this aggravation, and I'm not going to see you anymore. I'll marry you if you want to marry me. Well, that was a shocker to me, because I didn't have any money. I had nothing but debt, and I was scared to death of marriage. But I really found her irresistible. So I said, okay. So I went home the next morning. I told my mother that I was engaged. She says, who are you engaged to? I said, Charlene Sabate. I don't know. Well, I said, I just met her last week. What do you mean you met her last? Well, I've known her for a week. She almost had a fit. And Charlene's family almost had a fit. So Charlene's mother calls up her sister. That's Ruby's. That's the one who fixed us up. Ruby's mother lived with her. And so that's her sister-in-law. So she called her up and she says, Nellie, do you know a Sid Tuchman? Now this is, they lived on the other side, real nice part of town. They had money. They were okay. Society, they were part of society. They belonged to the Broadmoor, all that stuff. So she says, do you know a guy by the name of Sid Tuchman? She says, yes. What kind of a guy? He says, he's very nice. Well, how do you know him? He delivers cleaning to my Ruby. Well, that's all my mother-in-law has to hear. She's having a fit. What are you doing? In 1 week, you got to find a guy. You've been to college. Everything is all right. You're going to marry a guy who delivers clothes. Well, it worked out pretty well for us. We did okay. So we got engaged in 1 week, and we were married about 2 months later. And we had 3 wonderful children. And our children are doing well. I think I told you about the kids. Am I done? Have I said everything that needs to be said?
Oh, let me ask you.
Because I don't have
well,
any
let's
notes
ask you
here. Huh?
a few more questions. So you've got 3 children, and how about grandchildren?
I have 7 grandchildren. Ellen has 2 kids, darling kids. 1 kid, we just talked to him the other day. Samuel is her oldest. This is Ellen. She married John Rothman, who was a talk show host. He reads a book a day, very smart guy.
How did they meet?
I fixed them all up. I fixed everybody up except Mitchell. Well, I'll tell you about that in a minute too. Anyway, I fixed them up. They don't agree with this and they don't believe it, but I did. For example, we were in California. We had just moved to California. And Ellen says, what are you doing tonight? We hadn't moved there. We were there for a couple of months to see if we wanted to move to California. And Ellen says, what are you doing tonight? My kids are very sweet. They look after us. What are you doing? And I said, we don't have anything to do. Well, I was just going to go to there's a Jewish guy. I was going to go to a single something over at the Jewish Community Center. And there's a Jewish guy there, and he was going to be talking about the Jewish families of San Francisco. But I don't need to see that. We'll go out and we'll go to a movie. Jewish singles. That's all I have to hear. This is Jewish singles. I said, Jewish families of San Francisco? That sounds fascinating. That would be interesting, wouldn't it, honey? Oh, yes. Let's do. Are you sure? Yes. So we heard this guy, and he was, John's dynamic. And I went up to him afterwards because I wanted him to come to Indianapolis to speak to our temple. And I said, have you got a card? And he gives me a card. And then he says, do you have a card? And I said, oh my God, of all times, I didn't bring a card. And Ellen says, well, I have a card. Here, call him, I'll get in touch with my father. So they started dating. And Charlene and I were in Europe, in Milan. And the phone rings. And it was John and Ellen. About 2 months later, they were engaged. So I did that. I don't know if she admits it, but I fixed that up. Then Kathy tells me, that's my other daughter, that's my youngest daughter. Kathy says that there's a Jewish singles thing going to Israel. And I said, well, great. I hope you're going. She said, well, how can I go? I don't have any money. Kathy, we'll send you. She says, I know why you're doing this. You do it because you think I'm going to find somebody there and marry. Well, I said, that's the furthest thing from my mind. But it was scary once we sent her to Israel. Who does she take up with? Some Irish farmer that was over there from Ireland checking out the farms or something. My daughter has to find an Irishman over there. So I said, no, listen, you go there, and we want you to enjoy the earth and the soil and the history and the wall and all that sort of, get close to your roots. Well, under those conditions, I'll accept your offer. Absolutely. So that's where she met Michael Glass. And they started dating and they got married. See, I did it, but they won't admit that. But I don't care. So, and Mitchell, what did Mitchell do? No, Mitchell married a wonderful girl. Darren, as a matter of fact, this is kind of interesting. He's very enterprising. Mitchell, now wait a minute, let me think here how this goes. Mitchell wanted to get married, but he was starting a new business. And he's working, and he doesn't like bars, and he doesn't like, going there. So he offered a $5,000 reward to anybody who would fix him up with somebody to whom he would marry. Well, the word got around. Ellen told this one, that one, and somebody who's now become a good friend of us. What the hell's her name? Bear. Something Bear. I hope she never sees this thing because she's a very good friend of mine. But if you think I can remember her name, I can't remember her name. But it's Bear. Irwin and Ann Bear. There you are. Ann Bear worked for the Federation, and she talked to a lot of people who did recruiting. She tried to get them involved in the Federation, young people. And Darren came in one day, and she says, now, I don't know this Mitchell Tuchman, but I understand he's very nice. She didn't tell her that she had a chance of getting a $5,000 trip to a spa. Why don't you go out with him? Okay, but just for coffee. So they met for coffee, and they didn't go home until midnight, and they started going together, and they got married, and now they have 3 children, 3 wonderful children. So Mitchell has 3 kids. My daughter Ellen has 2 kids, Samuel and Joel. Mitchell has 3 kids, Jack, Leo, and Lucy. And Kathy has 2 kids, Marshall and Kimmy. Kimmy is a darling girl. She was sitting on my lap one day, and she looks at me, and she says, Grandpa, your cheeks are falling down, but I'll fix it. She goes like this. Well, I slapped her. I thought that was kind of impudent. Didn't you think so? No, I didn't really slap her, but anyway. So I've got lovely grandchildren. I got sweet, wonderful, memorable stories about each one of them. What else? What have I forgotten? All right.
Okay. We're on.
You're on me now. Not
I'm on
Charlene.
both of you.
Okay. Well, you heard me refer to my wife. Well, this is my wife. This is Charlene.
Your
This
kids
is
are
the
going
girl
to be
that-
watching this,
this is
and
the-
you're saying you have to introduce me to your children?
No.
Who is
well,
going to see this?
Well, somebody will see it. I don't know.
Okay.
The cleaner.
And Charlene, what is your
But
birthday?
anyway, no, this is the woman that proposed to me in 1 week. Do you think it'll last?
I hope a long time. I'm
We got-
looking forward to it.
Well, we've got many, many more years to go. And over there, you heard me talk to my sister's daughter, Charlene. Can you move that thing over? You think this guy is Steven Spielberg. He's giving me all kinds of directions.
Now you can move it back.
Charlene, what's your maiden name?
Malofsky.
And you are married to me, Fred Feniger.
So they tell me.
All right, let's go back.
Okay.
Here we go.
That's my sister Rose's.
So how do you think
Rose
you did?
was my, what?
How do you think you did with your story? You got everything in there you wanted to get in
I
there?
have no idea. I was doing this all from the top of my head. And I'll probably say, oh, why didn't I say this or why? Can you think, Charlene, or can you think of something I've forgotten to say?
I don't know.
Well, we can always
I
do this
wasn't there
again.
the
We
whole
can
time.
add to it. You can listen. You can watch it on TV, and then you
Okay,
can
well,
see what else you
You've
want.
got to come around here because everybody got to see who the Steven Spielberg of the Tuchman family.
Here, I'm going to
This
get
is-
Okay, I'll get back here.
Fred Feniger.
I'm Fred Feniger. That's correct, and I've been videotaping this today, September 2, 2007.
On a beautiful day in Indianapolis, Indiana. Okay, that's it. This is for posterity.
Did you tell them when you were born?
Last minute.
Me, I was born July 28th, 1924. An auspicious year. I don't know why it was auspicious, but maybe it was auspicious.
Did you tell them that your mother tried to jump off tables to get rid of you,
That's
but
right.
that
I was
never
an,
happened?
That's right. I was
Thank
an unwanted
heavens.
child.
Thank heavens that didn't happen. But I had a wonderful mother-in-law. She wasn't around long enough, really, but the times that she was by, I mean, her strength was
We're over.
incredible.
We're done.
Okay.
Her strength was incredible. She was a strong woman.
Did you love my mother?
Oh my God, she was
Did you?
great.
Yeah, she was.
You remember, we lived with her for about 5 or 6 months till our house was ready.
Did you tell him that your uncle came over at 14